The transport ship hummed through the dark void of space, carrying its human cargo toward the distant planet of Vylorus, and nobody on board knew their lives would change forever when they arrived. Jake Morrison sat near the window watching stars, streak past like silver threads, and he was just a simple engineer from Colorado, who fixed broken machines and never imagined he would leave Earth. But the colony program needed workers, and he needed a fresh start after losing his job. The ship carried 200 humans, and most were excited about building a new life on an alien world where 3 different species lived together in peace under the rule of the Valorian Empire, and humans were the newest members invited to settle there. Princess Lyria stood on the landing platform of the royal palace waiting for the human ship to arrive, and she was tall with silver skin that shimmered like moonlight, and her eyes were deep purple, like the evening sky of her homeworld, and she wore flowing robes of blue and gold that marked her as royalty. Her father, the king, wanted her to greet the humans personally because it was important for the royal family to show respect to their newest allies. But Lyria had doubts about these creatures from Earth because she heard they were weak and fragile compared to other species. The Valorians were strong and could lift 3 times their body weight, and they lived for 300 years and could survive in harsh conditions, and the other species in the Empire were equally impressive with their own special abilities. Humans seemed ordinary by comparison, and Lyria wondered why her father invited them at all. The transport ship landed with a gentle thud, and the doors opened, and humans began walking down the ramp into the bright sunlight of Vylorus. And they looked around with wide eyes at the massive buildings and the colorful sky that had 2 suns instead of 1. Jake carried his bag down the ramp and felt the warm air hit his face, and gravity here was slightly heavier than Earth but manageable, and he saw the crowd of aliens waiting to greet them, and his breath caught when he spotted the princess. She was beautiful in a way that seemed impossible, and she stood taller than everyone around her, and her presence commanded attention, and when her purple eyes swept across the crowd of humans, he felt small and insignificant. The welcoming ceremony was formal and brief, and Princess Lyria gave a speech about friendship between species and building a future together, and her voice was musical and strange, but the translation devices everyone wore made her words clear. After the ceremony, the humans were taken to their new settlement area on the outskirts of the capital city, and it was a cluster of simple buildings where they would live while they worked on various projects for the Empire. Jake was assigned to work at a manufacturing facility that produced parts for starships, and the job was similar to what he did on Earth, and he was grateful for the familiarity. Days passed, and Jake fell into a routine of work and rest, and he made friends with other humans and learned about Valorian culture. And the aliens were polite but distant and treated humans like children who needed guidance. One evening, Jake was walking back to his quarters when he heard shouting, and he followed the sound to a construction site where a massive crane had malfunctioned, and a steel beam was falling toward a group of Valorian workers. Without thinking, Jake ran forward and pushed 2 workers out of the way, and the beam crashed down where they had been standing, and dust filled the air, and when it cleared, Jake was lying on the ground with the beam across his legs, pain shot through his body. But he gritted his teeth and tried to stay conscious, and the Valorian workers stared at him in shock, and one of them ran for help. Within minutes, a medical team arrived with floating stretchers, and they carefully lifted the beam off Jake and examined his injuries, and his legs were badly bruised and 1 ankle was fractured. But he would recover. News of the incident spread quickly, and the next day Princess Lyria came to the medical center to visit Jake, and she entered his room with 2 guards, and her expression was unreadable. Jake tried to sit up, but pain stopped him, and he settled back against the pillows and looked at her nervously. Princess Lyria stood at the foot of his bed and studied him for a long moment, and then she spoke, and her voice was softer than he expected. "You saved 2 of my people yesterday, and you put yourself in danger without hesitation, and I want to understand why." Jake shrugged and immediately regretted it when pain flared in his shoulder, and he took a breath and answered honestly, "They were in trouble, and I could help, and there was no time to think about it." The princess tilted her head, and her purple eyes seemed to look right through him. "You are human, and you are fragile compared to us, and the beam could have killed you, and yet you acted anyway." Jake nodded. "That is what humans do, and we help each other even when it is dangerous." Princess Lyria was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in her expression, and it was like she was seeing him for the first time and not just another weak alien. I have misjudged your species, and I thought humans were weak because your bodies are not as strong as ours. But I see now that strength comes in different forms, and your courage is remarkable. Jake felt his face grow warm, and he did not know what to say. The princess continued, and her voice held a note of respect that had not been there before. I would like to learn more about humans and about you, and perhaps I have been wrong about many things. Over the following weeks, Princess Lyria visited Jake several times while he recovered, and they talked about their worlds and their lives, and Jake told her about Earth and its oceans and forests and cities, and she listened with genuine interest. Lyria shared stories about Valoris and its history, and the responsibilities of being a princess and how lonely it could be to always be watched and judged, and Jake saw beyond her royal exterior to the person underneath. When Jake was finally released from the medical center, he returned to work. But now things were different, and other Valorians treated him with respect, and some even friendship, and the story of his heroic act had spread throughout the city. Princess Lyria invited Jake to the palace for dinner, and he was nervous as he walked through the grand halls with their high ceilings and intricate artwork, and servants bowed to him, which felt strange. The dinner was private, and just the two of them in a small dining room with windows overlooking the city, and the food was alien but delicious, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing, as weeks turned into months. Jake and Lyria spent more time together, and she showed him parts of Valoris that tourists never saw, and secret gardens and ancient temples and hidden waterfalls, and he told her jokes that made her laugh, which was a sound like wind chimes. The other humans noticed, and some were jealous, while others were proud that one of their own had befriended royalty, and the Valorians whispered about the princess and the human, and wondered what it meant. Jake tried not to think about the future, and he knew his time on Valoris would eventually end, and humans were only contracted for 5 years, and then they could choose to return to Earth or stay, and he did not know what he would choose. One day, Princess Lyria took Jake to the tallest mountain on Valoris, and they climbed to the summit and stood together looking out at the world below, and the two suns were setting, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple and pink. Lyria turned to Jake, and her expression was serious. I need to tell you something, and I have been thinking about it for many weeks. Jake felt his heart beat faster. What is it? Lyria took a breath, and her silver skin seemed to glow in the fading light. My father wants me to marry a prince from another species to strengthen political alliances, and it is my duty as princess, and I have always known this day would come. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the chest, and he had not realized until that moment how much he cared for her, and how much he hoped for something more between them. But there is a problem, and I do not love this prince, and I do not even know him, and for the first time in my life I want to choose my own path. She looked at Jake, and her purple eyes were bright with emotion. You showed me what true strength is, and it is not about physical power, but about courage and kindness and sacrifice, and you risked everything to save people you barely knew. And that is the kind of person I want beside me. Jake could barely breathe, and he did not know what to say. Are you saying what I think you are saying? Lyria smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her truly smile. I am saying that I choose you, and I know it will cause problems, and my father will be angry, and the council will object because you are human and not royalty. But I do not care anymore. Jake laughed, and it came out shaky and uncertain. I am just an engineer, and I fix broken things, and I am not a prince or a warrior. Lyria reached out and took his hand, and her skin was cool against his. You are more than you know. And you fixed something in me that I did not even realize was broken, and you showed me that strength is not about what you can lift, but about who you are willing to stand up for. They stood together on that mountain as the suns disappeared below the horizon, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Jake knew his life would never be simple again, but he also knew he would not change this moment for anything. The next day, Princess Lyria announced her decision to the royal court, and just as she predicted, There was chaos, and the king was furious and demanded she reconsider, and the council argued that a union between a princess and a common human would weaken the empire. But Lyria stood firm, and she spoke with a voice that commanded attention, and she reminded them that the empire was built on the idea of unity between different species, and if they truly believed in that ideal, then they must accept her choice. Some council members were swayed by her words while others remained opposed, and the debate raged for days, and Jake stayed in his quarters unsure of what to do, and worried that he had ruined everything for Lyria. Then something unexpected happened, and the 2 Valorian workers Jake had saved came forward, and they spoke to the council and told the story of how a human had risked his life for them without hesitation, and they said that kind of character was rare and valuable. Other humans joined them, and they testified about Jake and his kindness and his work ethic and how he treated everyone with respect regardless of their species. Even some Valorians who had worked with Jake spoke on his behalf, and they said he had proven himself worthy through his actions and not his title. The tide began to turn, and slowly, the council members started to see that maybe the princess was right and maybe true strength came from character and not bloodline. The king remained unconvinced, but he loved his daughter, and he could see how determined she was. And finally, he agreed to allow the union on one condition, and Jake must prove himself by completing a trial. The trial was an ancient Valorian tradition where someone seeking to join the royal family must demonstrate 3 qualities, and wisdom and courage and compassion. Jake accepted the challenge even though he was terrified, and the trial would take place over 3 days and would test him in ways he could not imagine. The first test was wisdom, and Jake was taken to a chamber filled with puzzles and riddles created by the greatest minds in Valorian history, and he had to solve them using logic and creativity. Jake worked through the night struggling with some problems and solving others, and he used everything he had learned both on Earth and on Valoris, and when dawn came he had completed the test. The second test was courage, and Jake was sent into the wilderness alone with only basic supplies, and he had to survive for a full day and night in a region filled with dangerous creatures. He built a shelter and found water and avoided predators by being smart and careful, and when he returned the next morning he was exhausted but alive. The third test was compassion, and this one was different, and Jake was brought to a hospital where sick and injured people from all species were being treated, and he was told to spend the day helping in any way he could. Jake worked alongside doctors and nurses, and he held the hands of those in pain and brought water to the thirsty and listened to the stories of the lonely, and by the end of the day he was emotionally drained but fulfilled. When the 3 days were complete, the council gathered to review the results, and they agreed that Jake had passed all 3 tests and he had demonstrated the qualities required to join the royal family. The king stood before Jake, and for the first time he smiled. "You have proven yourself worthy, and I give you my blessing to marry my daughter." Princess Lyria ran to Jake and embraced him, and tears of joy streamed down her silver face, and Jake held her tight and could not believe this was real. The wedding was held a month later, and it was a grand celebration that brought together humans and Valorians and other species from across the empire, and the ceremony blended traditions from Earth and Valoris, creating something new and beautiful. Jake wore formal robes in the Valorian style, and Lyria wore a dress that shimmered like starlight, and when they exchanged vows, Jake promised to stand beside her through whatever challenges came, and Lyria promised to never forget the lesson he taught her about true strength. After the wedding, Jake and Lyria worked together to improve relations between humans and Valorians, and they created programs that encouraged cooperation and understanding, and slowly the barriers between species began to break down. Jake never forgot that he was just an ordinary man who fixed broken things, but he learned that sometimes the most important things to fix are not machines, but hearts and minds and misunderstandings. Years passed, and Jake and Lyria ruled side by side, and they had children who were a bridge between 2 worlds and carried the best of both species. The empire grew stronger, not because of military might or political power, but because its people learned to see past differences and recognize the strength in each other. And it all started because one human did not think twice about running into danger to save strangers, and because one princess was willing to see past her preconceptions and recognize true courage when it stood before her. The story spread across the galaxy and became a legend, and people told it to their children as an example of how love and bravery can change the world. Jake Morrison, the engineer from Colorado, never sought fame or glory, and he just wanted to do the right thing. And in doing so, he found something greater than he ever imagined. And Princess Lyria, who once doubted the value of humans, learned that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the strongest people are those who act despite their fear, and not because they have none. Together, they proved that the bonds between different beings can be stronger than any force in the universe when built on respect and understanding and genuine care for one another. The end of their story was really just the beginning of a new chapter for the entire empire, where humans were no longer seen as weak or inferior, but as equals with their own unique strengths to contribute. And every year on the anniversary of the day Jake saved those workers, a celebration was held throughout Valoris to honor not just him, but all those who show courage and compassion in the face of danger. It became a reminder that anyone can be a hero regardless of where they come from or how strong they are, and that the greatest strength of all is the willingness to stand up for others even when it costs you everything. Jake and Lyria lived long and happy lives, and when they were old they would sit together and watch the stars and remember that day on the mountain when everything changed. And they knew that they had found something rare and precious and worth fighting for, and that their love had helped build a better world for everyone who came after them.